Unity 4. All Christian disputes. Hello everybody, I'm Jim McCotter. Welcome. 2 Corinthians chapter 6 verse 1 through 5 says this: If any of you has a dispute with another believer, do you dare to take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the Lord's people? Or do you not know that the Lord's people will judge the world? And if you are to judge the world, are you not competent to judge trivial cases? Do you not know that we will judge angels? How much more the things of this life? Therefore, if you have disputes about such matters, do you ask for a ruling from those whose way of life is scorned in the church? I say this to shame you. Is it possible that there is nobody among you wise enough to judge a dispute between believers? End quote. God has established in His Word every possible scenario where there could be division with His body of believers and what to do to keep perfect unity. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, the Apostle Paul addressed the issue of someone professing to be a believer in the church who had clearly been practicing immoral sin. And the instruction for such a person was to be put out of the church and not to associate with them in any manner. Now here in the very next chapter, the Apostle Paul addressed another problem that would break up the perfect unity of believers in a church. It is a situation where there may be any kind of conflict between two believers. And the Apostle Paul makes it clear in such a case that believers in the church should never go to non-Christian secular court to settle their dispute. Paul makes it clear if you go to non-Christians to settle a conflict, in verse 7, to have such lawsuits with one another would be a defeat for you. Why not just accept injustice and leave it at that? End quote. However, if a believer has a conflict with a non-believer, that is a different matter. In such a case, if the non-believer is unwilling to use a wise Christian to make the judgment, then you have liberty to take them to the secular court. But settling outside of going to the secular court is usually the best, as it can cost a lot of money, and you may not always get a just decision. I have seen more than one case where Christian brothers took their dispute to the elders of the church, and always the elders' verdict was just. If a brother who was wronged wants to be merciful, of course he can be. But the wise believer who is to judge the dispute between two believers, it is not for him to be merciful at the expense of the one wronged. The Christian judge should declare and demand only what is just. God gives at least 5 places in the New Testament how perfect unity can be maintained in any church. Some of these we've already looked at. Matthew 5:23 and 24. If you remember someone has something against you, go and be reconciled. Matthew 18:15 through 20. If someone has sinned, go to them and restore them. 1 Corinthians 5. Not to associate with anyone who claims to be a believer but is sexually immoral or greedy, an adulterer or slanderer, a drunkard or swindler. 1 Corinthians 6, 1 through 5 that we're looking at. If there is a dispute, go before a wise believer to judge the case. And Titus 3, 10 and 11. Reject a divisive person after a first and second warning. If you are not in a church that obeys these scriptures, you are in an unholy church, or a church that seems holy because all sin referenced above is never addressed as God says above. People may like the music and the pastor, but Hebrews 12:14 says, but without holiness, no one will see the Lord. If people just come as spectators to hear a talk and music, there is no real unity needed for that church. It's not much different than going to a secular concert with a motivational speaker at the end. But if the church is to be all that God's people, as an invading army, as Jesus said, fighting against the gates of hell, then unity is an absolute, or Satan's gates of hell will prevail.